Hello, friend, and welcome back to episode number 22 of my 31-day challenge, where every single day I'm answering your questions about creating a career or a business that you love. And in today's episode, part 2, leading on from yesterday's discussion about hiring teams and working with freelancers versus working for yourself. This part 2 is about how do you go about choosing the right person or the right team members to work with. So we're going to be diving into that. If you've got a question, you can reach out to me on Alex Makes VR on Instagram and Twitter. If you've got a longer question, you could email me, alexmakesvr@gmail.com. And every single day when I put out these episodes, I'm sending out a newsletter just to give you a recap of what's in the episode and to remind you that it's live. So if you would like to sign up for that, the way you can do that is signing up at www.alexmakesvr.com. So leading straight on from yesterday's episode, yesterday, obviously, we dove deep? Is that a phrase? Well, we'll go with that. We dove deep into, it sounds so wrong. Anyway, we looked at the pros and cons for hiring a team or working with freelancers, and also just a bit of a kind of insight into when might be a good idea to start working with other people. But then the biggest kind of next follow-up question, which is kind of part and parcel, is how do you know who is the right people to work with? How do you go about choosing the right team? How do you know if they're going to be a good fit? How do you know if you're going to get on? How do you know if they're good at their job? Like, so many elements that go into it. And unfortunately, this is probably going to be one of those more holistic episodes rather than a exact formula. The answer is there is no real way to know. And there is no real way to go about choosing the right people to work with, because ultimately, until you work with someone, you don't know if they're going to be a good fit for you. You don't know if they're going to be good at their job. You don't know if they're going to deliver on time. Are they trustworthy? Are they good around the client? These are all some of the things, especially for me, these are things that kind of come to mind when I'm thinking about choosing a team. Now, caveat to all of that, one of the big things that I'm focusing on right now, and if you've followed me for a while outside of the podcast world, you'll know that I am very much an advocate for VR for good, but also promoting and making sure that we have a real diverse and inclusive pool of talent in this industry, because we're building it from scratch. We're essentially building this industry from the ground up. And for me, I really want to make sure that I'm contributing to, as a hirer, as someone, a decision maker who gets to allocate budget and gets to give people jobs. That's on me. It's my responsibility to make sure that I am not just taking the easy route and just going on a recommendation, which I'll get into in a second, as like obviously the main way that people do choose who to work with. But for me now, my big focus is not necessarily looking at someone's track record, but absolutely going on how confident I am that this person will pick things up very quickly if they don't have the most experience in the world. And also, number one thing, and this is the thing that I've learned after years of working with complete arseholes along the way, and not just in the VR industry, but in my previous career in TV, is actually any day of the week, I would deal with the headaches of maybe needing to be a bit more on top of someone and making sure that they're delivering on time, and maybe their quality of work isn't necessarily like at 100%. But if they are a nice person, if they are kind, if they are someone that I really get on with, if they're someone that I think has good intention, if I think that job is going to be more valuable and be more of an opportunity for that person, I will 100% go with someone who is a little bit more inexperienced, and someone who maybe isn't within my network, and someone who hasn't come with a recommendation, over someone who has come with a recommendation, has got loads of portfolio work, but I know from experience is a complete arsehole, or I can just tell from the first time meeting them that they are stuck up their own arse, and like they might be really good at their job, but I'm just not willing to work with people like that anymore. And I think that is a big mistake, especially when you first start out. your tendency is to, especially when you're hiring freelancers, it's kind of like, well, I'm going to get the best. Like, I want the best for this project. And yes, absolutely, there is a place for that. And I'm not saying that you should, hire someone who's crap. I'm not saying that just for the sake of, making sure that you're being inclusive and making sure that you're kind of pulling from outside your network. And when I say being inclusive, by the way, I'm not talking about specifically diversity. Of course, that comes into it. I'm not specifically saying, hire someone who's not a white man. What I'm saying is, reach outside of your network, because for so long, and it is a bit of it's a trap. It's a bit of a kind of a catch-22 with this industry, because it is so small. Everyone knows everyone. But if you're not in the inner circle, if you're not in the kind of the clique, let's say, of the who's who in the VR industry, sometimes it can be really hard to be recommended for work, because you're not necessarily tapping into the same kind of networks. And there could be loads of reasons for that, but I went to, in fact, no, this was at the IVRPA event last year. There was an incredible 360 filmmaker who was talking about her project. Her name was Dee Harvey. And yeah, go follow her. She's brilliant. She does lots of really cool stuff in the VR world, specifically like filmmaking and a documentary background, I think. And she did this great talk at IVRPA talking about... or maybe it wasn't her exact talk, or we had a conversation afterwards, or maybe it was part of a different panel. But we got on to talking about the fact that as a working mum, it's really hard to be able to, for example, go to these events where people are networking, because obviously you've got childcare duties and you've got to kind of their priority. So a lot of the networking, a lot of the getting referred, a lot of the chumminess happens at those events, and working mums are immediately at a disadvantage because they've got their kids to consider, so they might not be able to get the childcare. And it's something that I just never thought about, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, makes total sense. Because even, for example, I've been like fairly single for the majority of the last kind of like few years, and I happen to think that that's been a massive advantage for me, because not that my coupled up friends haven't necessarily like done as well, but of course when you're in a relationship, then that takes priority, and it should take priority. And you can absolutely have a great career and be in a relationship. But the amount of hours that I worked and grinded and just when I was like, just honestly, I just worked like a dog for the first couple of years of my VR career. I would go to every event. I would spend every single penny and like credit card money on like trains to London to make sure that I was going to those events. I would, take opportunities to work with people like abroad, and then, kind of like fund my way through that. And I would like see everything as this opportunity. I would not say no to anything. I would be on calls, like stacking calls all day, and then do work on top of that. I was grinding so hard. And I do think like, wow, yeah, I don't know if I could have done that if I was A, in a relationship at the time, and B, if I was a bit older, because obviously when I first started in VR, I was in my mid-20s, and I was at that kind of age where, I'd been out in the real world enough to kind of be able to survive, but I was still like very happy to just eat crap food, not worry about burning out, not worry about pulling all-nighters, all of that kind of stuff. Whereas when you start to creep towards 30, you got, which is so funny because it's only like a few years difference really, but it's all of a sudden like, how do I get balance in my life? How do I be more mindful of, not putting myself in lots of physical strain? So, even thinking around that, and then obviously then I'm not going to make this episode all about like how we end up with a non-diverse workforce in an industry. But essentially, if you start to think about that, if you start to think about, well, actually, I was very fortunate to be in a position where I never really worried about not being able to pay rent, because I knew that worst came to worst, I could just leave my house and move back in with my parents, worst come to worst, or I knew that, I could just borrow money from my brother, or, I always kind of felt safe, like taking these big risks, these big gambles, like putting stuff on credit cards, not knowing that whether or not I was going to end up being able to pay it off because everything worked out great, which it did, fortunately, or whether I was going to end up bankrupt sleeping on my brother's sofa. Like, I didn't know which way it was going to go, but I took the risk and did it anyway because I was fortunate enough to be in a position to do that. Whereas there's a lot of people in the world that are not in that position. And of course, there's something to be said for, kind of where there's a will, there's a way. And if someone who looks like you has done it before, then you can do it, and all that kind of great stuff. Like, yes, rah, rah, woohoo. But at the same time, as a hirer, as someone who employs people, that's absolutely front of mind for me now, is thinking like, okay, the obvious person to get in for this shoot is this person. And that's because they've been recommended by loads of people who are within that inner circle that do go to the events and do go to, all of the things and do get all the projects. So they're the safe bet. But actually, there's probably some like scrappy graduate who's like desperate to get into the VR industry and just needs a chance, and is probably going to work 3 times as hard for, let's face it, probably half the pay just to get that experience. And I'm not saying you should exploit people, of course not. Pay people a fair wage, pay people like their day rate, of course. But at the same time, sometimes like that's really paid off for me, is like taking a chance on someone and they've turned out to be, lifelong friends. They've turned out to be like people that have gone on. That one opportunity, which was like barely an opportunity, it was like a couple of days of work, has gone on to give them the confidence to then go on and do their own thing. I remember getting an email actually from someone probably about, no, it must have been pre-COVID, so it would have been early this year. And I hadn't even worked with this person, but she'd seen a talk of mine, and she was like, I came up to you afterwards and you gave me some advice about getting into, and I do remember her really specifically, and she was asking about becoming a DOP in 360, and I gave her some advice, and I got an email from her. This was like maybe 2 years ago, and I got an email from her at the beginning of this year saying, oh, I don't know whether you remember me, but I came up to you, gave me this advice. And just hearing you say that I could do it, like I did go do it. And I ended up working with, XYZ, who happened to be within my network because they are part of this kind of inner clique of the VR industry. And now she's like working on her own projects, and she's, a camera assistant for this really big name 360 person now. And I'm like, yes. And that's when you're hiring someone, sometimes it is about going for like someone that actually you just get a really good vibe from, and you can see it, that they're like, you can see the kind of hunger for that opportunity. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking about choosing team members and choosing who to hire. If you don't follow Gary Vaynerchuk, who is like Gary V, Mr. Marketing Businessman, I really love his philosophy on hiring and firing. His thing is like, loads of people really overthink hiring. They think that, somehow if they can just get XYZ right, if they can just think through blah, 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 if they can ask them just the right question, that they'll know whether this is the right person. He says you should spend very, very little time on hiring. Just do a gut check. Do I want to work with this person? Do I think they can do the job? Take a risk, acknowledge that it might go horribly wrong, but it's not worth the brain space to be overthinking it. Hire them. And if it doesn't work out, or if something goes wrong, just trust that you will be able to fix it. I think I kind of talked about in yesterday's episode, there's been a couple of projects that I've worked on where, not that things have gone massively wrong, but there's definitely been like errors happening, or there's been stuff that's going on. And I knew that was kind of like a risk because of the overstretched workload that happened to be on our slate at that particular time. But I just knew it was worth taking on more projects that we could handle so that we could grow, so that I could really see where that limit was for the team, and realise where the breaking points are, realise what are the parts of the process that need to get better, and just know, trust in my ability that I'd be able to rectify it with the client. And this is something that I talked about in another episode. When it comes to like working with people and obviously working with your own team and hiring freelancers and stuff, the key thing is, are you going to enjoy working with them is absolutely number one. Like, are they a good person? Are they going to be a good fit for your team? Then number two, can they deliver the work on time? And number three, I would say, is probably the quality, because people really overrate quality, but quality is so subjective. So I would way rather hire someone that is kind and delivers on time than thingy. But coming back to that, there's obviously the side of like the client side, which is like working with people, choosing who to work with in terms of like clients. And it's the same thing. If someone is going to offer you 100 grand for a project, but you know that you are going to be working every single hour of your waking day for the next 6 months, and you're not going to make 100 grand profit, that is just like the project fee. You're maybe going to make like 20, 30 off of that, like, which is obviously amazing, but then you account for taxes and then you account for everyone else's fees, etc., etc. All of the stuff that goes behind that. When you think about, working like on a project like that, you have to think about, am I willing to take a call from this person at 6 a.m. shouting at me down the phone because, they want the 107th amend on that project and there's 7 different decision makers all disagreeing about it. Like, you have to make those decisions about whether that's worth it for you. And just in my experience, when you're young and you're just starting out, you will 100% take the job for the money, 100%. But then as you get more established in your career, once you've worked with enough different kinds of clients, you'll realize when you work with a good client, you'll be like, oh God, like, this is what it should feel like. It should feel almost effortless. Like, they should feel like almost like a friend. Like, obviously they can be a friend. Like, some of my closest clients have become, I would consider them friends, and I would talk to them about stuff not related to work, and I'll have a bit of banter back and forth on WhatsApp, but it should be easy. You should almost become part of their team. Like, the way that you interact, again, like, everything's a people game. Life is a people game, and business especially is a people game. So make sure that you're choosing like people that you really want to work with, that you really enjoy the company of. And of course, that is going to be trial and error. Of course, you're going to land some like bad clients and you're going to land some bad team members, and that's fine. You learn and you move on. I feel like I've probably brought this up in several episodes. My favorite saying at the moment is basically the motto of Silicon Valley, which is fail and fail fast. Because it's only when you fail fast that you can rebuild and learn from those experiences. There's so many case studies in Silicon Valley of some of the most famous like companies in the world have been pivots, because they started with a particular product and then it went horribly wrong. There was absolutely no appetite for that product. It failed miserably. And just when they were going to give up, they said, well, what have we learned from this experience? And then they built it back up from the ground up. Slack, for example, Slack is one of those. In fact, you know what? If you're interested in that philosophy and you're curious about kind of startups, some of the big startups in the world and how they kind of made it to where they are, there's an amazing podcast series by NPR called How I Built This. It's one of my favorite podcasts. It's very dramatic, it's very dramatized, but it's basically interviews with some of the founders of the most wildly successful companies in the world, and they basically go into all this and they talk about the pivots, they talk about the journey, they talk about their learnings. That's, for me, I love looking at that. It's not very good, there's not really very tactical, practical advice in there, but just inspiration and thinking, there's this common thread in all successful startup founders, which is you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to take a risk. And when it comes to hiring a team, that is no different. You've got to be willing to take the risk. But another kind of thought that I was kind of percolating in my brain whilst I was rambling about that was coming back to the whole thing of the trifecta, right? It's like, you're a nice person, you deliver on time, you deliver high quality. You're probably not going to work with people very often that can deliver all three. If you can, phenomenal. Not to blow my own trumpet, but I think I mean, I'd have to talk to my clients about this, but I think the reason why I have like such a long-standing relationship with my biggest client is probably because I can do all three, because I'm nice to work with, I do deliver on time, and actually the work that I deliver is pretty damn good. So, but it's rare. So when it comes to like picking your team, when it comes to picking freelancers, I would say personally, you have to prioritize someone who is nice, that you can get on with, like someone who's kind. That for me is a non-negotiable. And then it's up to you to pick whether you would rather someone who will deliver really high quality, but they might take a little bit longer, or they'll like do 5 different amends, or they'll want lots of kind of, it won't be like a straightforward process with them necessarily to get that high quality product. And for some projects that will be suitable, and for others it won't. When it comes to client work, that is not suitable, because ultimately quality is subjective, and whatever the client deems to be good quality is what you have to go with. The amount of projects that I've worked on when I go in and they say, we want a really creative, exciting new idea. And I'm like, yes, so exciting that, a kind of a commercial piece is going to be basically like working on a passion project. And then 2 meetings in, the big boss has decided no, we want it to be like a traditional training video, but it's got to have like creative flair to it. And then you start to tread the water of trying to make sometimes a simple kind of like an induction video around a warehouse seem like it's a really creative project. So just an example of like, if you're working with someone who delivers high quality work, that's great. But often especially in the corporate world, they don't want Disney quality. Do you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. I'm a little less brain foggy, so hopefully this has come out a bit clearer. I think it's a super nuanced thing though, and like I say, you won't get it right like straight away, and the sooner that you can just go out and make mistakes, the better. But a great way to start maybe would be to, if you've got someone who you've found online, or that you've kind of like you've seen in the groups on the Facebook, or people that you've like maybe admired from afar, maybe give it a shot. Like maybe do a test sample of something. So for example, if I'm working on a client project which has a fairly decent budget, potentially sometimes I will kind of designate part of my fee to working with someone in like a test capacity. So it's like, okay, let's do a little test shoot. I'll pay you your day rate. Let's do a test shoot. We'll get to know each other. We'll get to know how we work, and it will be relevant to the client project, and it might help save time down the line. But it basically gives you that confidence. But if that's not an option, if you don't have the money to, or the project fee is not big enough to be able to do that and do like a little test, then meet up with that person, like have a coffee, meet up a couple of times, get them involved in like, talk to them about the project maybe. Don't necessarily just like rush in and be like, oh, I need someone last minute. Which I guess I should probably touch on that, because I appreciate that for me, especially when it comes to like picking people to work with, often time sensitivity is a massive factor of who I will end up picking. So the last couple of projects that I've worked on where I've needed someone very, very quickly, and I've had no time to be able to think about, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna like really spend time to like work out who I want to work with, and I want to make sure that I'm kind of like, looking for someone who might have the right opportunity. Like sometimes you just need a killer. Sometimes you just need someone that you just know is going to get the job done, who comes highly recommended. And for me, that has been basically going to the people who I really admire, who have worked on similar enough projects, but I know have worked with enough different kind of people to be able to give me a really good recommendation. And then I will hop on the phone with that person, and I will kind of just get a feel for them. Again, like when I first talk to someone who's like new to me, I just like to like that first chat is just about who they are as a person. I don't care. I don't want to hear about their work. Don't want to hear about their portfolio. Don't care. I want to hear where they are in life. What are some of the things they're up to? What are they passionate about? Like, why did they get into like VR specifically is always really interesting. I find that fascinating because everyone has a different story. I can get a sense very, very quickly if I'm like, if that person is going to be right to kind of work with me. And then to some extent, again, you just take the leap and you just deal with it if it goes horribly wrong. But for me, 99.9% of the time, it doesn't go wrong. I've never had such a huge... I've only had one massive catastrophe where the client project actually just ended up falling through massively because of the wrong team working on it. But that was more because I wasn't in charge of hiring and I was part of like a team being brought in to execute a creative agency's job. And it was just very poorly managed, very badly kind of done. Very last minute, they needed someone to do sound and no one I knew was available, so I ended up bringing in someone who wasn't really a sound person. Like it was it was a messy situation, but there was lots of factors. But you know, even that horror story, which could make me cringe, and it does make me cringe a little bit thinking about it, but I just think, you know what though, that wasn't that I can walk out of that and go, yes, I did my best under the circumstances to try and get that right. And I've just not looked back ever since. You put it to the side and you move on. So don't overthink it. Start to work with people, just start to work with people, just start to get to know people, especially like if you can start to kind of build these bridges, look at people's stuff online, like especially in this community, we're like loudmouth, we're constantly talking about stuff on social media, so it's very easy to see who's doing what, but also don't be afraid to like look a bit further afield and get that new blood into the industry. So like it is a fine line and you have to tread carefully, but I hope that helps. I hope that gives you a bit of an overview, a bit of an overview on how you go about choosing who's right to work with. If you've got any follow-up or you've got another question you want to ask me, we've still got, in fact, we've got less than, no, wait, what episode is this? 22. Yeah, we've got less than 10 episodes left now of this current incarnation. So if you've got a question, then feel free to ask it to me on social media. I'm AlexMakesVR on Instagram and Twitter. You can send me a longer question at alexmakesvr@gmail.com. And every single day, if you want to sign up for the newsletter to get those emails from me every day, bit of a recap of the episodes, then you can sign up at alexmakesvr.com. If you're still listening, thank you so much. Genuinely, I know I keep talking about it, but I genuinely am so blown away by the fact that people are listening to these, and they're not only listening, they're taking action. And you listening right now, like, don't overthink it, just do it. You just got to do it. And I promise you, every single step that you take is going to get you closer to that dream life that you want for yourself. But it won't happen if you don't take the step. Don't have analysis paralysis. Just get on and do it. Okay, I'll speak to you tomorrow.